Please welcome to the stage our panel host, Joe Craparotta, Vice President of Cloud and Service Providers, Schneider Electric. And our panellists, Prashant Murthy, CFO AirTrunk, Nirupa Chander, SVP Secure Power International Region, and Antony Steinberg, Managing Director, Head of Power, Utilities and Infrastructure, RBC Capital Markets.
Antony, welcome. Great to see you. A round of applause for our panellists, please. There we go. Amazing. Thank you all for attending this session. I know there's quite a few people in the hub, which is exciting. Nirupa, Antony, Prash, thanks for joining us today. There's a lot of experience on this stage today, so I'm going to try and dive deep into the depth of knowledge on the stage as well. Maybe to frame up the session over the next kind of 42 minutes. Most definitely, the capital flow around investment and Treasury, the technology phase that we're going through is super, super interesting. Australia and New Zealand in particular have been a wonderful recipient of that capital and those investments over a period of time. As a proud Australian in a great region, I love to see Australia and New Zealand punching above its weight. So today we'll talk a bit about Treasury, a little bit about technology, about the digital infrastructure of the future. We're living in interesting times, so definitely there's great certainty about the relationship between energy and digital infrastructure and assets. There's definitely certainty about the capital flowing in. There's certainty about the chips and the chip allocation, which is driving a lot of this as well. But we also live in uncertain times and less predictable times. No doubt the new leadership in the US is driving less predictability, and every day is an interesting day. Certainly the legislation around chip allocation across the country, across the zone, across the world also drives a little bit less certainty. So we'll dive into those aspects as well. I spend quite a bit of my time lately sitting back and reflecting about the important moment that we are entering. I think the next few years will define the way we live for the next 100 years. And as a father with two sons, 27 and 25, the way they live and the way hopefully one day their kids will live will be defined by what happens the next few years. So hopefully we make good decisions and we invest in the right areas going forward. With that as a bit of framing, again, Nirupa, Antony, Prash, welcome. I might start with those trends I talked about, and the trends of the industry are defining a lot. Maybe Prash, I will start with you in terms of what trends you're seeing, what trends you're tracking at AirTrunk, and what are the things you're looking out for?
Yeah, thank you, and thanks everyone for joining. Look, the big trend we're seeing, and this is really the genesis of the AirTrunk business, is we just see continued migration to public cloud. We see that happening in so many geographies. The markets in which we operate in, especially Australia, Singapore, Hong Kong, Japan, Malaysia, and we're seeing it increasingly in just about every geography as we sit today. It's amazing to think that right now as we sit, there's still so much migration still to happen to the cloud for many enterprises, and the additional workloads that continue to come on. But increasingly, we're obviously seeing the birth of AI now and what that translates to as a trend for us and the markets in which we see that, and finally use cases that are actually coming in with cheaper and faster abilities to actually create models. That's itself going to be driving additional demand, and there's a lot of forecast of where that actually sits in pipeline for us. And interestingly, the force multiplier that actually has back into cloud as well. You know, for all those entities, all those businesses that aren't on cloud today and you want to access AI, you need to be on cloud first, otherwise it's practically either impossible or too expensive to actually do it. So you're going to see a force multiplier in that direction, as well as new workloads come on as a result of that and new AI products that get created. So for us, it's a really exciting and interesting time as to where this continues to go. There's obviously challenges with that, you know, mainly the big one really being the ability to actually access supply. So whether that's land with sufficient power, water, the ability to construct and permit and build with sufficient connectivity, the access to capital relating to that, the supply chains to actually meet the needs of what's in front of us, and working very closely with suppliers to actually meet that, the talent base to do so, and then fundamentally to also make sure we're doing it responsibly. So they're probably the big things that we're seeing as our major trends. It's the demand is very much there. It's like, how do you make sure you optimize it, capture it, really be sustainable with it into the long term.
I want to come back on the AI piece, Prash, because most definitely if we talk about what's been more predictable over the last decade and a half, it has been cloud infrastructure. Certainly for Australia and New Zealand, there's been a cloud-first adoption from government down to enterprise all the way through small to medium business for a decade and a half. Very predictable architecture. And I want to come back a bit later on the AI piece, because that's the element of not uncertainty, but most definitely we're going through an innovation cycle, particularly on the AI piece. Antony, in terms of what you're seeing from your lens?
Yeah, Joe, very much consistent with what Prash is seeing in relation to the demand side. And that demand side is really driving a need for capital. And we are seeing globally a huge amount of capital being raised to be deployed into digitalisation and that infrastructure thematic. And it's also coming through from an energy transition and renewables perspective. So I think as we sort of take stock of where we are today and think about the amount of capital that's been raised globally to go into both of those two thematics, the challenge for us down here in Australia and in the region is getting that capital deployed down here. As we've seen over recent time, and even if you look back over the last 12 months or so, we've seen some very large transactions, AirTrunk, CDC more recently. So there's certainly opportunities to deploy that capital down here. But given the size of the task at hand, the challenge really is how does everyone play down here in Australia and in the region from a capital perspective and deploying that capital. That's from an equity perspective. From a debt perspective, what we're starting to see is people looking offshore in relation to what we have seen in alternative forms rather than just bank debt. So we're starting to see people look at capital markets, USPP, securitisation, and we're also seeing globally people starting to now look at asset stabilisation vehicles. So selling down and bringing in lower cost of capital to fund out the rollout that's needed. I think also when we think around the power need, a really significant amount of power is going to be needed, Joe. And that's just not the generation side, it's also the transmission network, the distribution network, and how we bring all that together, as well as the sustainability question. So clearly, as we think around power, the end customer is looking for a sustainable solution, and that needs to flow through when we think about how we actually power data centres in the region. Australia, as we all know, has the large majority of its power today coming from coal-fired generation. That coal-fired generation is getting older, so as we think around sustainable energy coming into the system, it's a really interesting time because that all needs to be funded as well, Joe.
It is. I'll come back on that whole energy system and data centre system or ecosystem as one. I'll come back on that as well. But certainly I will be interested a bit later on in the discussion around kind of the leaderboard of investment by geography. So what does it look like in terms of Australia and New Zealand, given the geopolitical movements, given all of the different nuances by zone? We'll come back on that. It's a really important point. Nirupa, you have a very broad ecosystem of responsibility from Middle East, Africa to South America and lots in the middle, including this great zone. What are you seeing in terms of those trends?
I think very similar to what Prash and Antony have just said. You cannot decouple the conversation of energy along with AI and data center build out. There's a huge amount of infrastructure that needs to be built out, which doesn't get done overnight. Thanks to capital, that makes it a little bit easier. But on the other hand, this infrastructure needs a lot of collaboration between the different parts of the ecosystem. So our focus is definitely on the technology side and how do we help this build out of infrastructure in a sustainable way. And this is what we're also showing on the technology side, as you know very well, Joe, in the Innovation Hub, in terms of the products and solutions that we're bringing out to market that can help us reduce the overall consumption in a data center. And PUE is one big lever to overall improve the efficiency, looking at better compute that'll deliver another level of efficiency, and then of course solutions around behind the meter and how we power all this in energy demand with more renewable sources and battery energy storage and microgrid type of technologies. So I think the conversation around all this demand build out has to be very much linked to how we do it in a very sustainable way. Yeah. And this is a conversation across the board, across the international region, not limited only to Australia.
Yeah. It's interesting to see those trends across the globe. So, Antony, if I go back to you on this whole prioritisation of capital, if we're competing on a global scale, how attractive is Australia and New Zealand now and moving forward on a region to park capital, to develop capital and see strong returns? Are we in the conversation still? What do you see?
Yeah, we definitely are in that conversation, Joe, and we just need to look at recent transactions in this space, as I touched on earlier. AirTrunk, CDC, we've seen Partners Group make an investment into Green Square in the last week or so, and there continues to be good appetite to deploy down into data centres in the region. Clearly the ingredients for data centre businesses are the land, the power, customers, clearly, and also the people to run those businesses. And it's a global pool of capital that we deal with day in, day out, so they are making decisions. So, clearly having certainty is fundamental as people think about their risk and return calculation, ultimately. And as we think around the opportunity set going forward, it's going to be clearly important to have certainty around where the power is going to come from. And people will make a comparison. We see that every day. As investors go to investment committees, they're making a comparison globally. Capital is portable. We've seen Australian capital invest into data centres globally in a significant way. We saw IFM going to Switch. We've seen Aussie Super going to Data Bank. So we've certainly seen large transactions offshore with Australian pension capital going and being deployed offshore, but we see the right ingredients for further capital to come down and be deployed in region.
Prashant, I might go back to you on investment. You've recently gone through a very small transaction with Blackstone. Congratulations.
Thank you.
On that. I hope you're getting some sleep of recent times, because maybe the last 18 months you didn't. But in all seriousness, what's changed with Blackstone coming on board? What's different? What stays the same? I know you had a very unique construct in the way you connected your finance to your sustainability passion and priority. What does that look like going forward?
Yeah. Let me first start by just picking up on what Antony was saying as well. And I think as we look at this space, what's really been interesting is the evolution of how capital is looking at the data center space. And I say this from the lens of 10 years ago when no one really understood it. And so even as our own investors that we had back then, Goldman and TPG, which were great investors for us, they really got us off the ground, but they were the more traditional, well, not traditional, special situations types investors. And so that's really what this sector has sort of sought itself as. Progressively, you've seen then the infrastructure capital turn up into the space as well about 5-6 years ago, and really when Macquarie PSP were investors into our business. Now we've got Blackstone and CPPIB, who very interestingly are co-investing out of their real estate and infrastructure arms. And so to me, this is really just part of that evolution of how this sector is really being seen. And I think just the next point before the next one, which is this is its own asset class. The amount of capital that's deployed into this sector from the full value chain set, whether you go all the way from the land all the way through to the various aspects that are supplying capacity in energy, supply chain, but also AI chips, all the way through to the end product. There is so much capital deployed against this entire value stack of product that it's increasingly being seen as its own asset class. And so I think that's this interesting mix between real estate infrastructure with a technology lens to it, and frankly also now a utilities infrastructure lens to it, before maybe more infrastructure in the fact of how the contracts were structured, but now increasingly also from an ecosystem perspective on the water, the power side of what our sector looks like. And really that's one of the great aspects of our partnership now with Blackstone and CPP, is that they really recognise that this is the direction of travel of where we're going. So what's changed? More access to funding, greater aspiration to continue to grow our platform. We've always been an ambitious business. We've built what we've built in 10 years. And really a lot of that in the last 7.5 years, which coincides with when I joined. So it's, but really in that time of what we've actually created, like going forward, we're continuing to be highly ambitious of what we're trying to create, which markets we're entering into, how we go deeper, how we go bigger. our business is always built off the idea of speed, scale, reliability, efficiency, and sustainability. And frankly, it's just exactly those things, it's just more of it. As it relates to the sustainability side, one of the great features of working with Blackstone is that they totally recognise this as well. We do have a really cool sustainability debt platform as we sit today already. We're about to announce it actually on Wednesday. We've sort of been softly announcing it for the last 2 years when we kicked it off, but we actually have converted all of our debt obviously into sustainable linked loan, as we've talked about extensively, and we're the largest issuer of that globally. But actually every dollar that we get as margin incentive, we've been putting into a social impact fund that we've been investing into community projects in all the geographies in which we operate. So we have projects live in Australia and in Japan. We have one was about to be launched in Malaysia, but it unfortunately had to be pulled back because the operator is no longer a going concern. We have one running in Singapore. So we're going to continue to sort of move into that direction. And speaking to Blackstone, it's always a bit of an uncertainty as are we all still continuing to see like for like here. Fundamentally, this industry and our spot in this industry, in our view, is very much tied to us adding social value, us actually being having this concept of social preference as a business. And Blackstone are absolutely in the same page there, as well as CPPIB. And so that's really our direction continuing. So everything that we've done, we're going to continue to do. We continue to look for more projects, more interesting, innovative ways. When we started, it was all about PUE optimization, energy wastage, which we then translated into further green energy, green carbon solutions, which we translated further into how to water optimize. We looked at from a business of gender diversity, where when we kicked off this as sort of a focus, it was like 25% as a business. We knew that we were growing, so we within a year got to 36%. And we're continuing to move upwards, towards 40 to 50%. There's always pluses and minuses with these things as you enter new geographies and certain markets, but that's our direction of travel. If you saw last week in the AFR, I think we're the only technology company with a median gender pay equity in favour of women, not in favour of men. So there's various initiatives that we're doing there, and again, great to see that Blackstone's really sitting alongside of that, because I think that's also where you're seeing this space is, irrespective of sort of maybe some more global views on global perspectives of DEI, of sustainability, I think countries like Australia, Singapore, Japan, the agency we have for ourselves are focusing there, and investors like Blackstone and CPP are absolutely following suit.
That giving back to community and that kind of social license to operate, Prash, has been, it's quite inspiring. So it's wonderful to see, really wonderful to see.
Thanks, Joe.
Nirupa, again, across your regions, if we stay on prioritisation of capital, and you look across all your geographies, what are you seeing in terms of the areas that industry is still seeing the best places to park capital? And are you seeing that very much hyperscale-led?
I think what's interesting now is in the global south, AI strategy is becoming part of the national framework. It's part of the government strategy. So closer to home, or I should say this is home, closer to where I live now, UAE has a Ministry of AI, so does Saudi. There's a lot of cross-collaboration between countries. You may have seen the announcement between UAE and France as well. So you can see this prioritization of data center physical infrastructure and AI-related infrastructure becoming part of national priorities. From the topic of data sovereignty, of course, that's where it all started, but now also to be a major player in this future ecosystem for the Global South to become a key player and democratize the availability of this technology to the Global South. So I think that's a common theme that I see across. I was visiting a data center customer in India recently, and one little fact that they shared stuck with me for a while, that India as a population uses nearly 35% of all data center capacity globally. And today, the physical infrastructure in the country serves maybe single digits, 4 or 5%. So you can just imagine the potential that if all Indians, the 1.4 billion of us, were to use data centers in the country, what kind of build out is needed to make that? And to build data centers, you need the right energy infrastructure. You need now, from an AI context, water, as you just said. You need the right type of local ecosystems, whether it's contractors or specialists. So yeah, there's a lot to do, let's say.
A lot to do.
There's a lot to do. So what's really good to see is that it's becoming a real priority from a geopolitical country standpoint, not only from a business standpoint.
There is a lot to do. I go back to the fundamentals, which is kind of land and access to energy and a skilled labour force. So regardless of geography, those pillars, it's like a four-legged table, and you still need at least two of those legs to hold the table up. Antony, just back on the whole ecosystem and this kind of unified system of energy and digital assets. We are in a world that's early on AI. We're still working out what that playbook looks like. You know, Jensen, you know, is almost Steve Jobs-like, where every time he gets up to present, it's, hey, let's have a look at this. And we go from 70 kilowatts a rack to 125, now at 225. And at the same time, we're kind of chewing and swallowing. From purely a capital lens, how are those two systems kind of assessed in light of this will change the game completely on energy systems to hold up that architecture? Is it being underwritten by, is the connection to government and grid providers needing to be completely underwritten? Is it a bit speculative on, you know what, we need to be able to manage at least this percentage of those workloads? Because as we discussed off stage, you know, the last hour, this could go from 0 to 100 in kind of 1 second. So from a market's perspective, what does it look like in the way you're assessing those systems?
Yeah, that's a good question, John. I think Prashant touched on it earlier when we think around the data centre funding that we're seeing today and just how that's matured over time. And when we look at the maturity of that capital and the return profile, and we're looking for, you know, a sort of what we would term from an infrastructure perspective, a core plus infrastructure return, and that comes with a level of certainty and an appropriate risk allocation. So when we think around investors deploying capital, they're looking for certainty in relation to actually be able to ultimately get that revenue stream. Part of that is having the grid connection, it's having the customer, and knowing what their cash flow is going to look like. So I think as the market has evolved down here, we're certainly seeing the need to have a level of certainty. And as we think around the transmission and distribution network, and also the power that ultimately is going to power the on-grid data centres, we're certainly seeing the need to have, you know, a differentiation of capital in most cases. So we're seeing different capital coming in and funding the renewables and taking the risk around those renewables. You know, I think we'll probably see more gas coming in to sort of firm up the renewables. And again, that's a different risk profile to what we're seeing on data centres. That would be the broad observation would make. We are seeing players who are coming in and looking to sort of wrap that together and looking to sort of provide different capital to underpin that.
Yeah. Prash, as this kind of AI percentage of your business continues to increase, and probably in line with what we model out, so, you know, 10% today, 20%, 30, 40%, 50% by kind of 2030. Is it a softly approach for AirTrunk, or is it very much hyperscale-led, tenant-led, and being able to move very, very quickly? Because you are operating in jurisdictions where sometimes access to some of the energy required is not immediate, and there's time required to build that infrastructure. For example, Malaysia and parts of Malaysia.
Yeah, look, to us, the answer is quite simply, like, what is the customer looking for? You know, we sign our really long-term contracts. We have only a handful of customers. You can count them on two hands. We really built our business really focusing on the needs of what that customer is looking for and really solving it with speed and scale, reliability, efficiency, and sustainability, like I mentioned earlier. So for us, you know, the biggest architecture change that's among us right now is the transition to liquid cooling for AI. That's probably the biggest question for us right now, is not anything else that we've done, is just continue the same direction of travel. But what does the product stack actually look like? How do we ensure that we provide, you know, maximum flexibility for our customers to utilize capacity in our data halls the way that they'd like them to? That's probably the biggest step change. And I think we're starting to actually get to a reasonable degree of landing. If you ask anyone in our sector, even probably 7 months ago, 8 months ago, they'd give you varied answers as to what that'll actually look like. I think we're starting to get to a decent degree of coalition now as to how that looks. But for us, the markets in which we operate, they've all got their challenges. You know, some are more permitting challenges, others are more access to water challenges, others are access to power challenges. There's obviously now another evolution and another element to this, and I won't go too much into this, but even on the geopolitics side and chip laws. So tier one markets like Australia and Japan, we're very, very, very bullish on. Other markets that are tier two, Singapore, Malaysia, even India, we see those as probably having solutions that are a bit more tailored for what that'll actually ultimately look like as well. But we see that being another lens as to where and how the capacity will grow. But fundamentally, what we look at today is where is power most available, where is it simplest to build, where is it the cheapest access to build it. That'll absolutely drive short-term demand. Long-term, medium-term, where is their power? Where is that capacity, that foresight to actually invest into? And candidly, there's a handful of countries out there that have been investing materially into their networks for a long time now. India and China, absolutely. And you're seeing other markets as well, including in the Middle East, in Saudi, that are deeply focusing on these as growth engines for themselves as well. How to make it simpler, how to make it cheaper, how to provide scale. So to us, we're looking at all of these as a global lens as to where and how this industry will shape. But fundamentally, there's a lot of agency for data that countries want for themselves. We mentioned earlier, Australia in particular, from a government lens, has really been a cloud-first adoption market. We expect to see that in every jurisdiction, and that means that there's going to be data centers in every market.
I wouldn't be a good salesperson if I didn't invite everyone to come have a look at the liquid cooling offering in the Innovation Hub. So we just announced the acquisition of Motivair, which I think some of you might know. So we've actually got the products on display. Exactly. Just had to throw that one in there, Joe.
Shameless marketing. I love it.
Absolutely. Yeah, but I agree with what you just said as well, Prash. Yeah, similar insights from us as well across the regions. I think the other kind of angle for us is to make sure as we're getting ourselves ready for all this build out, we also localize a lot of our setup in terms of industrial footprint and local capability to really enable this growth that we see in the future.
We've talked about the energy systems and so forth, but you raise a good point, Prash, on the whole cooling environment, and maybe going back to the whole sustainability piece as well. It's not just about power and capacity, it's about water and water usage and so forth, right? So it's the whole ecosystem. Maybe, Nirupa, if I talk about the fact that, like with any new trend, there can be a level of hysteria and good chaos, and I think AI is kind of the headline of choice. But if I go back to sustainability, underlying as a priority, and certainly it is for us, it's our permanent mission, for our clients like AirTrunk, and I'm sure, Antony, you see this around the industry as well as we do. But Nirupa, if I dig into sustainability as the priority, what are we seeing as our reaction to that? Especially around the cooling environment, that kind of AI-centric architecture.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, we can't totally decouple the energy demands of data center infrastructure and physical infrastructure for AI with the energy required. What we can decouple, and similar to what was presented in the keynote this morning, is the emissions. Like, how do you reduce the overall carbon footprint? And here there are a few levers, and there's a white paper that Schneider published around bending the energy curve with IEA, and basically what we're saying there is that there are a few levers. First is to reduce the PUE, which a target for 1.2 and below, and if we on existing data centers, if we were to change, say, 10, 15% of the data centers and reduce the PUE to 1.2, would be able to get another 4% gain already on the overall energy demand. So that's a relatively simple equation. So reduce the PUE and with technologies available today, then look at how to have better compute and the efficiency, and you see a lot of that happening as well in terms of the amount of digital data, zettabytes or whatever we want to call them, per terawatt hours that you can produce, so how to make it become more and more efficient there, and that's where the chip manufacturers are focusing, and we're working closely with them, whether it's NVIDIA or others, in developing reference architectures that go together. And then the third lever is really around behind-the-meter solutions and finding ways to reduce the overall consumption of this physical infrastructure. So, those are the 3 or 4 ways that we're looking at to how to, if not completely decouple, but at least bend the overall energy consumption that all this physical infrastructure requires. And finally, I think we all know that AI, there's the energy for AI, which is dominating the conversation, but there's also AI for energy and how the use cases of AI will help overall reduce the energy demand through optimization and things like that. We're just scratching the surface, really, on the potential of AI in industrial use cases.
And we just saw this recently and there's lots of lenses on DeepSeek, but like one really interesting lens is that it is potentially cheaper and faster to create solutions, right? Like that is, to me, that's the guiding principle of what this industry will do. And keep doing and doing it better and better and better until it actually uses itself to actually really optimize, so that you actually can drive significant volumes of compute, very discrete for very specific purposes, more efficiently. I fully imagine that, Schneider will have its own array of models that it'll use depending on what it's manufacturing or where it's distributing or how it's thinking about logistics or which markets it's operating within, what is its raw materials, and how does that actually interplay. And there won't be this big generic models. There'll be very discrete based on your data and very specific to your business. And I think you'll see that for every business. Banks, industry, every industry will see that as evolve, and then how it's actually used will itself optimize in that way.
Yeah. I might pivot a little bit, and this is not a political conversation, but we do have a federal election coming up in this country. It's a pretty important one. And if I kind of summarise the last 10 years where our industry and data centre in Australia kind of grew up with a few great entrepreneurs and hyperscalers coming in, and kind of the industry grew up on the back of that with not a lot of coordinated government assistance and not a lot of coordination with grid providers and so forth. I refer back to Global Switch being the largest data centre in the Southern Hemisphere 15 years ago, 30-odd meg, and what we're doing today is kind of dwarfing that. And so are we at the point where there needs to be, for Australia and New Zealand to be better assessed as accelerated investment? Do we need governments to be more coordinated? I note we have different planning processes, state to state, almost suburb by suburb. We have grid providers who are all trying to solve the same problem, but maybe they're not as close or coordinated. And we had this conversation off stage a little while ago. Do we need, Antony, a better coordination of governments and private enterprise in and around this segment to really be able to solve some of the problems we're talking about in this kind of ecosystem?
Yeah, it's a good question, Joe. I mean, I think it's very clear and evident to the people that work in the industry about the opportunity set that's in front of us, especially when we bring that down to an Australian perspective. And the key question is, how do we make sure that we actually optimise that opportunity that's in front of everyone? So to do that, I think we really need to see the sector coming together and make sure that we are actually working together as a sector to make sure that the broader community understands opportunity, some of the benefits that come from AI, and also just attracting the capital down to Australia. As you said, there's an upcoming federal election. Cost of living and the energy policy itself will be frontline issues as we sort of navigate through the next few months. So I think it's upon all of us really to think around sort of what is the messages that we can get out there and how can we get the policy certainty that's going to be needed to attract the capital down here to facilitate that opportunity set.
Yeah. Prash, your thoughts on that?
Sure. Look, I'll share a handful of lenses, and this is also somewhat informed by what we see at a global scale and what really here we can benefit from, because it is a very unique market with a lot of great resources and, importantly, a lot of great talent that we could really harness in a different way. First, on the energy side, this sector is a prime candidate to use to accelerate energy transition. We're doing this right now in our next Sydney West campus. We're looking at this right currently, which we'll make sure is part of it. In Johor is adding grid scale BESS onto our sites, like adding mass scale batteries next to these large power utilities is exactly what the BESS operators want. It's exactly what we want. It actually promotes energy transition, really helps the grid in times of greater uncertainty with with inflow. So there's more we can actually be doing from that lens of using this sector to actually accelerate an energy transition as well. The second I'd say that we should really think about here is on the workforce side. Like there is no university degree for a data center. We have this interesting mix of electrical and mechanical engineers. We have random like aeronautical engineers in our business who are like phenomenal, but like why from aeronautical? You know, you see basically people largely in this sector have largely come from something else and found their way accidentally into it. A lot of our control systems management really comes from ex-military. So there's like really interesting programs that we could actually look to use, whether it be for veterans, whether it be as part of university degrees, to actually get greater talent focused on what we're doing here. You're seeing a little bit more of it in some European countries. Like I wouldn't say anywhere's really necessarily solved this, but you could really harness the talent we've actually got in Australia for this. The third place I'd say there's really an opportunity is really on places like permitting. You know, we had a bit of a chat about this at lunch earlier today, but I wouldn't say we're in a tough spot here, but you could really utilise, you know, some of the thought processes on energy, on water, on permitting, and how to actually create this as an investment hub. So there's definitely greater certainty that can be applied there. And the fourth thing I think is super interesting is, you know, how great would it be to actually drive someone like Schneider to actually have more manufacturing capacity in country? You know, what incentives, like if we actually think about this as driving additional secondary benefits, tertiary benefits, the employment we could actually drive by utilising really high-end engineering talent locally in country, what that could ultimately do to reduce embodied carbon. It's a really tough challenge. But the more we actually source from really faraway places that need to be shipped and utilising energy networks that are not as clean as our own, like there is some really great incentive tools we can actually use to drive outcomes as well. So for me, there's a lot of things around the periphery that you could actually accelerate this to be a great market, because there's so many other people. Like even being tier one for chips really helps this being a major market. How do you sort of really harness that to be the market for the region?
Yeah, and on the people and skills one, I think we all agree that that's one of the kind of impediments to going faster, and I agree with you, Prash, in that. And we've looked at it, and we should be proud that someone can come in, post-grad, start a career in this industry and have a 15, 20-year runway of highly successful skills transfer and really be part of that, and those skills being recognised regionally and globally as well. So really agree on all those points. Nirupa, when you look around your region, is anybody doing it better in terms of the collaboration between private and public kind of coordination and some of the points that
I think, in the region that I cover, Australia's always been a bit at the forefront. In fact, the conversation that we're just having, I've been out of the ecosystem of Australia for about 8 years, so it just reminds me of the discussions that I was having in renewables about a decade ago, so very similar in terms of, so what I can say is I can count on the Australian ingenuity to figure this out and continue to punch above its weight on build out of further infrastructure and play a leading role on AI in the future as well. Yeah. So I think Australia is definitely setting a benchmark already. The question is, will it continue to do so? Mm.
We have all the elements.
Yeah.
All the elements are here.
Yeah.
In terms of smart workforce, land, power availability and so forth, but I think it comes down to how do we go faster. This is certainly a global game, and the game has changed. So we go from 10, 20 meg capacity requirements to 500 a gig, and that will take all of the ecosystem to lean in. This is not an easy problem to solve.
No, but I think the likes of AirTrunk that are Australian companies and now going global. That's again a good example and testament to the capability that we have in this country that can support the growth in other regions as well. So yeah, I'm definitely optimistic.
Yes, and you're almost Australian, so you should be very optimistic. Believe it or not, we're on the hour, and so I think thank you, Prash, Antony, Nirupa. Please, a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Wonderful.